A hush fell over the grand chamber of Zenith 12 as Ambassador Marcus Liu of Earth approached the podium. The diplomatic station suspended in the neutral zone between three major galactic sectors gleamed with the polished efficiency that had made it the premier meeting ground for species across the Concordance. Marcus adjusted his formal attire, the blue and gold of Earth's diplomatic corps, catching the light from the artificial sun panels above. Behind him trailed his 7-year-old daughter Aria, clutching a well-worn case of colored wax crayons. Her presence was unusual at such high-level negotiations, but a series of unfortunate scheduling conflicts had left the ambassador without childcare options. The Galactic Concordance Annual Summit waited for no species, not even humans, who were still adjusting to their relatively new status in the interstellar community. Delegates of the Concordance. Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tension hanging in the air. Earth extends its gratitude for this opportunity to discuss the Proxima Centauri Trade Corridor negotiations. As he spoke, Aria settled herself at a small table near the human delegation's assigned station. She carefully arranged her drawing materials, tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she selected a vibrant purple crayon and began to sketch. At the opposite end of the chamber, High Commissioner Zerath of the Tharkan Dominion observed the proceedings with barely concealed disdain. The Tharkan were notorious throughout the galaxy for their rigid class hierarchy and inflexible diplomatic positions. Their species had evolved on what humans would classify as a standard gravity world, with minimal environmental pressures, a fact they considered a mark of evolutionary superiority over lesser species, forced to develop under harsher conditions. The human delegation appears to have brought a juvenile to formal proceedings. Zerath remarked loudly to his aide, his translator module making no attempt to soften the condescension in his tone. How utterly characteristic of a Class 12 Deathworld species. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The classification of Earth as a Class 12 Deathworld had been a point of contention since humanity's first contact with the Concordance. The harsh evolutionary pressures of Earth, its high-gravity extreme weather patterns, diverse biosphere full of predators, and geological instability had produced a species that the Concordance viewed with a mixture of fascination and instinctive caution. Marcus continued his presentation detailing Earth's proposals for shared resource extraction rights in the newly accessible system. As he spoke, various diplomats exchanged subtle signals, measuring reactions and calculating advantages. The Arxians, with their multifaceted eyes, maintained an appearance of neutrality, while their secondary appendages tapped complex positional codes to their counterparts. The Maxillian delegation, recognizable by their shimmering exoskeletons, recorded every word with their biomechanical sensory arrays. Throughout it all, Aria continued drawing her small hands, moving with purpose across her paper. She had switched to blue and silver crayons now, sketching what appeared to be starships against the backdrop of a spiral galaxy. The presentations continued through the standard cycle, with each species presenting their technological achievements and diplomatic credentials with varying degrees of subtlety. The Tharkan delegation's turn was marked by a particularly ostentatious display featuring holographic representations of their extensive mining operations and military capabilities. The Dominion's new Helios-class vessels represent the pinnacle of propulsion technology, Zerath announced proudly, as the hologram displayed a sleek vessel with distinctive upward curving spires. No other species in the Concordance can match our engineering excellence. A small snicker came from the direction of the human delegation's table. Aria had glanced up at the hologram and promptly returned to her drawing with renewed enthusiasm, adding what looked like exaggerated versions of the Tharkan ships to her artistic creation. As the formal presentations concluded, delegates broke into smaller groups for the real business of the summit, the informal negotiations that actually determined policy. Marcus was deep in conversation with the Arxian trade minister when a commotion erupted near where Aria was seated. High Commissioner Zerath stood over the child's table, his elongated frame rigid with indignation. "What is this abomination?" he demanded, pointing at Arya's drawing. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the confrontation. Arya looked up, confusion evident on her face. "It's the spaceships," she explained innocently. "I made them into mushroom rock carriers because they look funny." On her paper was indeed a childish but recognizable rendition of the Tharkan vessels, reimagined as what could only be described as mushroom rock carriers. The proud spires transformed into comical fungal shapes, laden with pebbles. Zerath's translucent skin flushed with the deep orange of extreme anger. "This is deliberate mockery," he hissed. "The sacred vessel design of the Tharkan Dominion reduced to fungal transport." Marcus moved quickly toward his daughter, but not quickly enough. Before anyone could intervene, Zerath's hand lashed out, striking Arya across the face with enough force to send her tumbling from her seat. The crayon in her hand snapped in two, the pieces skittering across the polished floor in the sudden, shocked silence. "Tharkan nobility does not tolerate disrespect," Zerath announced to the stunned assembly, his translator broadcasting in the standard frequencies of all present species. For one eternal moment, the chamber remained frozen. Then, Arya began to cry, not loudly or dramatically, but with the quiet, confused tears of a child who doesn't understand what she's done wrong. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, checking her for injury. A red mark was already forming on her cheek, where Zerath's hand had connected. When Marcus stood, the transformation in his demeanor was palpable. Gone was the measured diplomat. In his place stood something the Concordance delegates had only heard about in briefings about humanity's evolutionary history, a parent of a Class 12 Deathworld species, whose offspring had been threatened. "Go." "High Commissioner Zerath." Marcus spoke, his voice unnaturally calm. "You have 24 standard hours to issue a formal apology to my daughter. Should you fail to do so, you will face consequences." Zerath drew himself up to his full height, nearly 2 meters taller than the human ambassador. "Consequences. From your species, I have reviewed your military capabilities. Earth has exactly 17 interstellar vessels, none of which match even our oldest defensive platforms." 24 hours, Marcus repeated, lifting Arya into his arms. "That is all the time you have." As the human delegation withdrew from the chamber, carrying the still sniffling child, murmurs erupted among the assembled diplomats. The Arxian trade minister leaned toward his colleague. "The Tharkan may have made a grave miscalculation," he observed quietly. "How so?" asked his fellow minister. "Their military assessment is accurate." The senior Arxian's multifaceted eyes gleamed. "The Concordance classification system measures only environmental adaptation factors. It fails to account for certain behavioral traits, such as what happens when you harm the offspring of an apex predator species." In the human delegation's quarters, an emergency meeting was underway. Marcus had just finished communicating with Earth Central Command, and the assembled team watched him with expressions ranging from concern to barely suppressed anticipation. Zenith 12 Security has reviewed the incident and declined to intervene. Marcus informed them, his voice clipped. "They've classified it as a cultural misunderstanding rather than an assault." "That's convenient," muttered the communications officer. "The station administrator is Zerath's third cousin." Marcus nodded. "Which is why we're initiating Response Rain." A ripple of surprise moved through the team. Response Rain was a contingency protocol developed after humanity's first disastrous diplomatic incident with the hegemony of Paxis, an incident that had nearly led to open warfare before careful de-escalation. "Sir," said the security chief, "Response Rain requires approval from—" "Already granted," Marcus cut him off. "I spoke directly with the Security Council. They're unanimous." In her temporary bedroom, Arya was being comforted by the delegation's medical officer. The mark on her cheek had been treated with a dermal regenerator, but the emotional wound remained. She clutched the broken pieces of her crayon, refusing to let them go. "I didn't mean to make anyone angry," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," the doctor assured her. "Some people just don't know how to use their words." Back in the main chamber, the Tharkan delegation received the formal communication from Earth. High Commissioner Zerath read it with increasing indignation. "Preposterous," he exclaimed. "They demand not only a public apology, but also reparations in the form of educational endowments. For a drawing." His chief advisor shifted nervously. "Perhaps we should consider—" "Silence," Zerath snapped. "I will not prostrate myself before primitives. Prepare our response. The Tharkan Dominion hereby expels all human representatives from Concordance space under our control. Furthermore, we implement a full trade embargo effective immediately." As the Tharkan message was transmitted to the human delegation, something unusual began happening throughout Zenith 12. The human merchants who operated small businesses on the station quietly closed their shops. Human engineers assigned to maintenance crews called in sick. Human entertainers canceled their performances. And just beyond the range of the station's sensors, 3 unmarked transport ships quietly detached from their docking positions and slipped away into the darkness of space. High Commissioner Zerath was in the midst of receiving congratulations from his subordinates when the first anomaly occurred. His personal communication device emitted a strange melody, an archaic Earth song about never giving up, that somehow bypassed all security protocols. Simultaneously, across the Tharkan fleet, navigation systems began experiencing minor glitches. Star charts would momentarily display nonsensical routes before returning to normal. Sensor arrays would detect phantom objects that disappeared when investigated. Likely cosmic radiation interference, the Tharkan chief technician assured the increasingly irritated Zerath. "Nothing our superior systems cannot handle." 23 hours and 45 minutes after Marcus Liu's ultimatum, the Tharkan delegation gathered in the Grand Chamber to announce their embargo. Representatives from across the Concordance had assembled to witness what many expected would be a humiliating capitulation by the humans who were conspicuously absent. Zerath took the podium with an air of smug satisfaction. "Delegates of the Concordance, the Tharkan Dominion wishes to formally announce—" He stopped abruptly as the chamber's lighting flickered. The holographic display behind him, intended to show the might of the Tharkan fleet, suddenly shifted to display an endlessly looping image of Zerath striking Arya, captured from multiple angles by the chamber's security systems. "What is the meaning of this?" Zerath demanded, but his voice was drowned out by a broadcast that overrode the chamber's communication systems. Attention all Concordance delegates," came Marcus Liu's calm voice. "The 24-hour period has elapsed without an apology from High Commissioner Zerath. Operation Crayon has now commenced." Throughout Tharkan-controlled space, an unprecedented series of events began unfolding with terrifying precision. Defense satellites mysteriously rebooted, coming back online with their interfaces replaced by crude crayon-like drawings. Communication networks suddenly began transmitting children's educational programming about conflict resolution and the importance of saying sorry. Most alarmingly, the vaunted Tharkan early warning system, the pride of their military technology, began requiring authentication through what appeared to be a dance movement, verification protocol, calibrated to 20th century Earth rhythms. On the bridge of his flagship orbiting the Tharkan homeworld, Zerath received increasingly panicked reports from his military commanders. "Explain to me," he said with dangerous quietness, "how a species with 17 interstellar vessels has managed to compromise our entire defense network." We don't know, High Commissioner," admitted his chief of security. "They seem to have inserted dormant protocols into our systems, months or even years ago. Our technicians are calling it the cookie jar vulnerability. It appears they've been accessing our networks using credentials we inadvertently provided during routine diplomatic exchanges." "That's impossible," Zerath slammed his fist down. "Our encryption is based on mathematical principles we shared openly during the Proxima Centauri Scientific Conference," completed his advisor, looking ashen. The humans attended that session. Before Zerath could respond, the view screen of his flagship activated without command. The face of Ambassador Marcus Liu filled the display. "Hi, Commissioner Zerath," Marcus said pleasantly, as though they were discussing the weather. "I see you've discovered some of the upgrades we've made to your systems." "This is an act of war," Zerath sputtered. "Oh no," Marcus corrected him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is what we humans call a timeout. It's what happens when someone doesn't play nicely with others." The image pulled back to reveal that Marcus was standing on the bridge of what appeared to be a human warship. Behind him stood a grim-faced admiral. "Allow me to introduce Admiral Helena Vasquez, commander of Earth's First Fleet," Marcus continued. "While our civilian vessels number only 17, as you correctly noted, our military capabilities have been somewhat understated in the official records." The image shifted to show an armada of ships emerging from the shadow of the Ophiuchus asteroid belt, a strategic position that placed them within striking distance of the Tharkon homeworld. "Impossible," breathed Zerath. "The concordance surveys were provided with the information we chose to share," Marcus finished for him. "A basic principle of diplomacy that the Tharkon might have considered." Admiral Vasquez stepped forward. "High Commissioner, you have 1 hour to broadcast a public apology to Arya Liu. Should you fail to comply, we will initiate Operation Paper Apology." "You would risk galactic war over a child's drawing," Zerath demanded incredulously. "No," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "We would risk galactic war over the assault of a child. The drawing is irrelevant." As the transmission ended, Zerath turned to his advisors. "Prepare our fleet for defensive positions. We will not be intimidated by primitive bluffing." But as his commanders attempted to relay his orders, they discovered that the entire Tharkon communication network had been replaced with an automated system that would only transmit messages containing the phrases, "I'm sorry," and "I was wrong." In the concordance chamber on Zenith 12, delegates watched in stunned silence as live feeds showed the human fleet taking up positions around the Tharkon homeworld. The Arxian trade minister turned to his Maxillian counterpart. "Did you know the humans possess this level of military capability?" The Maxillian's sensory arrays flickered in the equivalent of a headshake. Their official designation suggested minimal threat potential. This changes certain calculations. As the hour deadline approached, Zerath became increasingly desperate. His attempts to rally allied species to his defense met with polite but firm refusals. The concordance observers cited the clear provocation of striking a child as justification for remaining neutral in what they were now terming a behavioral correction intervention. With 5 minutes remaining, Admiral Vasquez's image appeared again on the Tharkon command screen. "Your time is almost up, High Commissioner," she stated, matter-of-factly. "We have prepared the necessary documentation for Operation Paper Apology. Would you like to review what this entails?" Without waiting for a response, the screen displayed a complex legal document titled Formal Surrender and Behavioral Modification Agreement for Species Demonstrating Class D Aggression Toward Juveniles. This document, Vasquez explained, transfers administrative control of the Tharkon government to an Earth-appointed Regency Council for a period of not less than 1 standard galactic year. During this time, your species will undergo mandatory cultural sensitivity training, with particular emphasis on appropriate interaction with children. Zerath stared at the document in disbelief. "This is absurd. You cannot possibly enforce—" Additionally, Vasquez continued, as if he hadn't spoken, all Tharkon military vessels will be recommissioned as educational cruise ships providing free tours of the galaxy to underprivileged children from various species. The Admiral's expression remained perfectly serious. "The alternative is that we demonstrate exactly why humans evolved on a Class 12 Deathworld, and what that means for species who harm our children." As the deadline expired, Zerath watched in horror as each of his fleet's command ships suddenly broadcast a continuous loop of the slapping incident, projected as massive holograms, visible from the planetary surface. Simultaneously, every government building on the Tharkon homeworld found itself surrounded by small, innocuous-looking satellites that had somehow bypassed all planetary defenses. "What are those devices?" Zerath demanded of his increasingly helpless technical staff. "They appear to be educational pamphlet dispensers," came the bewildered reply. "They're dropping millions of illustrated guides titled, 'Why We Don't Hit a Simple Guide for Evolutionary Disadvantaged Species.'" In that moment, facing the total collapse of his government's authority and the very real threat of human military action, High Commissioner Zerath made the only logical choice. "Open a channel to Ambassador Liu," he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. The formal surrender ceremony took place 3 days later, in a location that sent a clear message about humanity's priorities. A kindergarten classroom, hastily constructed on Zenith 12's diplomatic level. High Commissioner Zerath, along with the entire Tharkan leadership, sat in comically small chairs designed for children, while Ambassador Marcus Liu presided from the teacher's desk. Today marks a new beginning in relations between humanity and the Tharkan Dominion, Marcus announced to the assembled Concordance witnesses. "High Commissioner Zerath has agreed to personally apologize to my daughter and to implement comprehensive reforms in how the Tharkan interact with other species." Arya, her face now fully healed, sat at a special table at the front of the room. She had a fresh box of crayons, a gift from the Arxian delegation, who had recognized early which way the diplomatic winds were blowing. Zerath approached her table, towering over the small human child, even while stooping in what humans would recognize as profound embarrassment. "Miss Arya Liu," he began stiffly, reading from a prepared statement, written in crayon on construction paper. "I extend my most sincere apologies for striking you. My behavior was inappropriate and does not reflect the... He stumbled over the unfamiliar concept, the respect that all individuals deserve regardless of age or species. Arya looked up at him thoughtfully, then selected a golden star sticker from a sheet provided by her father. She carefully placed it on Zerath's formal diplomatic attire. "Thank you for using your words," she said seriously, exactly as she had been coached. "Would you like to draw with me?" The collective intake of breath from the Concordance delegates was audible. In Tharkan culture, an invitation to engage in a shared activity represented the highest form of status elevation, essentially raising Zerath from supplicant to equal. It was a diplomatic masterstroke that no adult would have dared attempt. Slowly, with the careful movements of someone handling explosives, Zerath lowered himself to sit opposite Arya. She pushed a sheet of paper toward him and offered a blue crayon. "You can make the ships look however you want," she told him. "That's what imagination is for." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in fascination as humanity implemented what became known as the Crayon Doctrine, a comprehensive restructuring of their diplomatic approach that leveraged their newly revealed technological and military advantages while emphasizing educational rather than punitive measures for cultural conflicts. The Tharkan Dominion, under the guidance of the human-appointed Regency Council, began a remarkable transformation. Their iconic pointed architecture, which had symbolized hierarchical superiority for generations, was gradually modified to incorporate more inclusive circular designs. Their educational system, previously focused exclusively on technical excellence, expanded to include courses on interspecies ethics and emotional intelligence. Most remarkably, the first Tharkan kindergarten opened its doors just 6 months after the incident, with High Commissioner Zerath himself serving as honorary first teacher as part of his community service sentence. On Earth, the Security Council convened a special session to discuss the implications of their now revealed military capabilities. "The Crayon Doctrine has proven effective," Admiral Vasquez reported, "but we should anticipate increased scrutiny of our activities throughout Concordance space." The Security Secretary nodded. "We've already detected probes attempting to assess our actual fleet strength. Fortunately, Operation Pillow Fort remains uncompromised." Across the table, Marcus Liu, newly promoted to humanity's chief diplomatic officer, raised an eyebrow. Let's hope it stays that way. The galaxy now knows we're willing to mobilize over harm to a child. They don't need to know just how far we're prepared to go. 1 year after the incident, a ceremony was held on Zenith 12 to mark the formal end of the human regency over Tharkon affairs. The station had been expanded to include a sprawling educational complex where representatives from across the Concordance could study what was now being called human behavioral diplomacy. In the central gallery, a special exhibition had opened, featuring artwork by children from multiple species, including a collaborative piece created by Arya Liu and Zerath's own offspring, a new addition that had surprised everyone, as Tharkon reproduction cycles were typically kept strictly private. During the ceremony, Marcus presented Zerath with a small, carefully wrapped package. A token to commemorate our new relationship, he explained. Inside was the broken crayon from the original incident, now carefully preserved in a transparent display case. A small plaque beneath it read simply, "Use for apologies only." Zerath held the case, carefully aware of the many eyes watching this exchange. "Ambassador Liu," he said formally, "the Tharkan people have learned much during this past cycle. We have come to understand that true strength lies not in rigid hierarchies, but in the flexibility to acknowledge error and grow from it." He gestured to his offspring, who stepped forward with a drawing, a remarkably skilled rendering of a human and Tharkan child, playing together beneath a sky filled with stars. "We have also come to understand why your species survived a Class 12 Deathworld," Zerath continued. "It was not merely your physical adaptations, but your capacity to protect what matters most to you. This is a trait the Tharkan now aspire to emulate." As the ceremony concluded, news spread throughout the Concordance of a remarkable update to the official classification system. Earth remained designated as a Class 12 Deathworld, but with a newly added notation. Species demonstrates exceptional capability for both decisive response to threats and proportional restraint in victory. Approach with respect, especially in the vicinity of their young. In her quarters that evening, Arya sat at her desk working on a new drawing. This one showed the Zenith 12 station surrounded by ships of all designs, with representatives of various species standing together in a circle. "What are you drawing now?" Marcus asked, looking over her shoulder. "The future," Arya replied simply, selecting a green crayon to add the final touches. And everyone's using their words. As Marcus watched his daughter work, he reflected on how a single moment of violence had catalyzed such profound change. The humans had revealed more of their capabilities than planned true, but in doing so had established a principle that even the most hierarchical species in the Concordance now understood. In this vast, complex galaxy, some lines simply must not be crossed. And slapping a Deathworlder's child was very definitely one of them. Years later, when Arya Liu had grown into one of the Concordance's most celebrated diplomatic artists, she would often be asked about the incident that had changed galactic politics. Her answer was always the same, delivered with the same gentle smile that had once offered a star sticker to a humbled High Commissioner. "My father taught me that the strongest response to violence isn't more violence, it's creating a world where violence becomes unthinkable. Sometimes that takes advanced technology and a battle fleet. But it always starts with being willing to share your crayons."